So in this video, I'm going to talk about servitors, entities very prominent in chaos magic. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly are servitors? A servitor for a chaos magician is a type of entity that's purposefully and consciously created to perform some sort of task or duty. Now, servitors aren't unique to chaos magic. In fact, this concept of a created entity can be found in a number of different practices. In Western esoteric traditions, for example, these types of beings are referred to as thought forms. In Tibetan magic, they're known as tulpas. For chaos magicians, servitors are called forth from the deep mind or the subconscious. These are semi-autonomous beings that a chaos charges with performing some sort of task. They're considered to be self-aware but fully tied to your needs and wants. Now, there's some debate as to whether servitors are a branch of your own subconscious or if they're actually separate conscious beings born from your soul or life force. Regardless, they come from within you, formed from your wants, your emotional self, from your very soul. In other words, these entities know you and your needs in a way that no other spirit or entity can. With servitor magic, you're creating this spirit using your mind, heart, and soul to serve your deepest needs, born of those needs and desires and your will, and they exist to fulfill those needs. So basically, these beings are useful for performing a wide range of things on your behalf. They can be made for one specific task, or they can be made for more general abilities. So for example, you could create a servitor with the sole purpose of healing your broken heart from a recent breakup, or you could create it to be a healer and consoler anytime someone hurts you from a romantic perspective. So why would you consider creating a servitor versus just doing a working? Well, one of the beauties of working with servitors is that since you create a servitor with a specific purpose in mind, you know that spirit is working specific for that exact result you want because you created it with that very result in mind. Remember, servitors are tied to your needs and your desires. But for many chaots, there are some other advantages. For one, it's the freedom and how often or how long you want to use one. Servitors can be created for one single purpose, to work only one time, or to produce results on an ongoing basis. So, servitors possess an intelligence that actually matches your own. This is another reason why chaots like working with servitors. The servitor, born of you, works in a way that naturally feels familiar to you. Yes, it will feel like a separate conscious entity, but it can feel as familiar as a relative. Servitors are also easy to contact, which is another advantage, especially for those that like to work with various entities in the workings in general. These servitors don't require ornate rituals or methods to contact them. This is more what you would see, for instance, in ritual magic. You work to make the spirits hear you, ask them to listen, feel your need, and then the spirits respond. With servitors, though, you determine the method of contact yourself, so contact is instantaneous. When you call, your servitor will always hear you. They're created to hear you and to respond. Another reason is that servitors are capable of growth and change. So the chaot can modify and adjust the servitor as needed, making servitors capable of growth and improvement. You can continue to fine-tune the efficacy of your servitor to improve its abilities to produce results for you. Although some use servitors as their primary or only means of magical practice, honestly, in many cases, there's really not a need to create a servitor. There's a number of things that can be handled by a simple spell or sigil in achieving gnosis. It's when someone doesn't feel workings will do the trick, maybe because they've had a string of unsuccessful spell work lately, perhaps the desire is too hard to forget so a sigil wouldn't be realistic, at least in the chaos magic sense. Maybe a particular task needs to be repetitive for extended periods of time or is rather complex. Things like that are what a servitor may be more appropriate or more of a reasonable option. So how do we plan and prepare for creating a servitor? Okay, so let's say you've determined a servitor is the optimal choice for fulfilling your need or desire. This is where planning, design, and preparation is key. Phil Hines suggests using some sort of a checklist to help you through the planning and design process. I'm going to go through the different things you'll want to plan and design, so as I go through them, I'll put titles of those things on the screen I suggest you add to your checklist. So the first thing is identifying your idea or your intent. And you start by defining what's the general intent. So you need to decide basically the general category where your intention falls into. So in other words, is this for healing, for protection? Is this a binding? So on. And then you want to dig a little deeper and then define your specific intent and make your statement of intent. So once you decide on the general type of your need, you'll want then to establish the essence of the servitor's purpose. You're basically determining your servitor's spiritual genetic makeup. The easiest way to do this is by creating a statement of intent. This isn't something you want to do on a whim. This is going to involve some self-analysis into what's motivating you to even want the servitor and being realistic about your goals and what's possible. And just like with any working, divination can certainly help with some of that self-discovery. Once you settle on your statement of intent, you'll then turn that statement into a sigil. And now we need to determine our overall vision. So now that you have your intent determined, you'll want to think about your vision for the servitor. You'll want to determine technical aspects of its existence, such as what is it that it'll actually do? How will it feed? When will it die? You'll want to carefully design and account for all aspects of your servitor. Don't set any hard and fast expectations on how long that will take. This can take weeks or it can take minutes. Think about things like what powers or abilities does it have? How often will it be active? What will it look like? What name will you give it? How will you summon it? Where is it going to reside when it's not working? Designing the sigil itself and designing the fatal flaw, which we'll talk about more in a bit. Now remember, your servitor has not been created yet. You're still in the planning phase, so you can keep changing your mind and fine-tuning until you're happy with your plan. So during this planning phase, don't take for granted the need to jot down those ideas and plans. You don't want to forget important ideas. Plus, it will certainly help if you're wanting to refine some of those plans and design during the process. So now you want to plan for its purpose. So let's look at the purpose of your servitor and what that means for its design. You've identified your desire, your intent, and you want to use magic to fulfill that desire. This is the servitor's purpose. Unlike a working, though, where you're focusing entirely on that intention and the energy manipulation to fulfill that intention, for a servitor, you need to think about how that servitor can help you. Think about the kind of servitor this will be. Will the servitor be assisting you with self-development, with being more perceptive or more influential, or are they helping you directly with your magical ability to manifest? Thinking through this will help you further define how it's going to accomplish this. So, for example, a self-development servitor may help with anger management. A servitor to help you be more influential can act on changing the way your coworkers perceive you or your ideas. So now let's talk about planning for its appearance. Okay, so don't take this part for granted. Designing how your servitor looks like really can contribute to seeing this being as true and real in your mind's eye. You want it to be something that you can picture easily and be strong enough of an image that you can easily recall it. Some people get a little nervous about this part because they don't feel like they're very artistic, but all this only needs to occur in your imagination. A physical representation really isn't necessary. A written description of the servitor's visual appearance should really give you enough of something to work with. You'll want the servitor's appearance to be reflective of its purpose and abilities. So, for instance, If you want a servitor that's powerful and strong, you may picture an entity built with big, buff muscles. Also, really think about the eyes. Are they pensive, sincere, serious, stern, sympathetic? Now, one thing you want to consider is, do you want the servitor to bear a resemblance to something living or something inanimate? And although many, including myself, are of the mindset that resembling living creatures tend to work out better, there are some that create servitors in the form of gases, rocks, other things like that. So obviously take that under consideration, but also determine whether or not you'll fully be able to identify with and communicate with a servitor designed as an inanimate object. On the flip side, although looking human generally has better results, you'll want to avoid basing its appearance on a real person, as those have also been known by other chaots to also be less effective, because you'll be thinking about that specific person. Also, don't forget to consider all your senses. Don't just consider how they'll look, but also think about how they may smell or sound. Is the skin going to be smooth, or is it going to be scaly or dry? Well, only do this, though, if you think it's going to enhance your ability to relate with your servitor. Don't overcomplicate things if you don't really need it. So now let's talk about timing. So what do I mean by that? Well, do you want your servitor to accomplish one single task in a day? Or will they be working continuously or repeatedly? And if so, when will they know to stop? Will they need to stop? Before actually sending your servitor off to do its work, it'll need to know this in order for you to maintain full control and for it to use its energy efficiently. Of course, the servitor's purpose will often dictate the timing of its actions. If you create one with a single task in mind, that's a bit more straightforward. It will complete its task, then, based on the details of your design, it will then dissipate. But if you're going to have a servitor that will need to be around continuously or repetitively, then you need to consider things like, will it always be activated? Will it have downtime to reserve energy? Will it only work when directly called upon or when certain conditions are met, and so on? And now let's talk about the naming. Okay, this is probably the most fun part. This is giving your servitor a distinct, unforgettable name. So your servitor can be named with a single word or a combination of words. Some people like to name a servitor after its form, its qualities, or maybe even its purpose. Others like to use names or words outside of their native language, or just create a new word altogether. Really, if it feels right to you, then use it. The only thing I'd say to avoid is to use the name of a known spirit or entity, or for that matter, the name of someone you already know. Lastly, it's really advised to keep the name to yourself unless you're creating the servitor with a group. And so now you need to think about how you plan to call or summon your servitor. And you also want to think about how they will respond to you. So servitors respond to their name when called. So say or think the servitor's name 2 or 3 times. Give yourself a moment to sense its presence, and that's really all that's needed. You also don't have to limit yourself to just calling on them by name. You can create your servitor to respond to one or more of your senses. For example, your call can be when you think on certain smells or sounds. So when you're initially creating and instructing your servitor, though, be sure to tell the servitor to respond when called once. Even though you're likely going to call them more than that, this is part of the reason for ensuring that you define how the servitor will respond to you. You may never need to call a servitor, or you could be calling on it daily, but regardless, always design a way for the servitor to come to you when called. Some people find that a bit mundane, so they may choose to add action, like a hand gesture, or to speak a word of power, or even to perform a bit of a ritual. If that's what it takes for you to find it easier to sense your servitor, then add whatever actions you feel will do that. When you're done with them for that moment, you don't need to worry about formally dismissing them. If you're talking with them and with your eyes closed, then just open your eyes. If you're focusing on the servitor's sigil, then look away from the sigil. So let's say you've done that, but you find you're still aware of the servitor. Well, that shouldn't be really an issue, but if it does bother you or you find yourself distracted by it, then you may need to call your servitor back and just tell it to stay quiet unless directly called. Just be straight with it and tell it you don't want to be bothered by an awareness of it. Instruct it to remain unseen but still come to you when summoned. So now let's talk about feeding your servitor. You get to decide how and when your servitor will be fed, bearing in mind when a servitor is given more energy, you'll get better results. Remember, servitors crave attention. It's your focused attention that's going to bring them into existence, so they're going to require that intention and awareness in order to exist. So what are some ways to feed your servitor? Well, feeding can be in a physical, mental, or emotional form. Many consider mental and emotional energy versus something physical to yield better results. So one simple way to feed your servitor is to have it be nourished by the emotional energy of pleasure and gratitude you feel when your servitors brought about a successful result. Any kind of strong emotion, though, really works well, but the gratitude is probably the emotion most likely to feed your servitor and the easiest to produce. Just make sure you're able to create the emotion at will. If you can't bring on an emotion at a whim, then you can choose to feed your servitor when and only when that chosen emotion comes about. Often, though, just acknowledging their existence can be enough. You can specify the sources of energy, or you can consider it automatically kept alive by attention, awareness, and gratitude. It's important to remember, though, if you lose interest, it's pretty likely going to fade out. Now, when it comes to how often to feed, you could do it daily, weekly, monthly, whatever. If you create a servitor that's often in hibernation and rarely working, it takes almost no effort to keep it alive. Just remember to feed it every few days or so, and at least monthly. You'll want to call on it and acknowledge its existence. Your servitor communicates with you via intuition, so you'll most likely intuitively know how much and how often your servitor needs to feed. The only way to truly determine, though, how much attention your servitor needs is just to experiment. Stay confident that results will happen and trust your intuition when it comes to the servitor's energy needs. Servitors don't generally require a lot of energy, but they really should get energy from more than one source. You can call on your servitor and let it be fed by your gratitude for doing the work you asked it to do, even if there's no results yet. And when you do see results, call in your servitor and thank it. There are some things to consider, though, when it comes to feeding. For one thing, be wary of bargaining with your servitor. Don't say you'll feed it only when it brings results. You can end up with some sloppy results as the servitor is now rushing just to get fed. Another thing is be cautious about feeding servitors with bodily fluids, sexual energy, or even your own blood. Yes, it will be potent, but those sources are harder to keep up with. Plus, sexual energy and bodily fluids tend to create a greater hunger in the servitor, so they may get juiced up really quickly and be strong, but it can burn out just as quickly and then they'll want to be fed again. And once your servitor gets a taste of that, you may find it harder to satisfy its hunger with anything else. So now let's talk about planning for where it's going to reside. So maybe you will have the servitor reside in the sigil itself. Maybe you can use an amulet, talisman, a fetish, a rock, or you can really use whatever you choose. You can even use one of your altars. Now, if you're wondering, do I even need to give it a place to reside? Well, technically, no. However, many practitioners generally find that servitors tend to be more responsive and effective if located in an actual place. Having said that, you can simply let it reside in your imagination if that's what's best for you and your servitor. But if using an object, you don't have to worry about finding an object that's the same size as the servitor that you designed. It's the essence that you're housing. So if your servitor is meant to be 6 feet tall, the housing does not have to be 6 feet tall as well. The only thing about the object you'll want to be careful about is to avoid something that already has other symbols on it, or already has a significant personal meaning to you, because this can confuse the nature of that object's purpose and thus the servitor's purpose. Wherever you decide, though, think about what its immediate environment should be. In other words, when you picture your servitor, where do you see it? Do you see it standing against a black background? Or maybe you see it in a fancy Victorian hallway or in a garden. This is basically what their residence looks like inside its home. It's really personal preference, but whatever you decide when you think on it, keep it consistent. Okay, so we've talked about planning for your statement of intent, for your servitor's sigil, its purpose, your overall vision, how it's going to look, what its name is going to be, how you're going to call it, how will it accomplish its tasks, how will it get its nourishment, where it's going to live. But at some point, your servitor is either going to complete its purpose or you're going to determine that it's unable to. Either way, you'll need to plan its ending. There are some chaots that choose to allow the servitor to retire and live out its existence in its own way, and often in another realm or the astral. But generally, servitors of Chaos Magick are deconstructed once its task is complete, and it's important to have this planned ahead. Some will program their servitors to self-destruct when the task is complete. Others like to make the process a bit more formal and ritualize the occasion. This would basically be a ritual deconstruction and reabsorption back into yourself. Chaos magicians also like to employ a type of fail-safe should a servitor get out of control. This doesn't always happen, but it's possible. This fail-safe is commonly known as the fatal flaw. So in planning for your servitor's end, you need to also design the fatal flaw. You want to build a specific set of vulnerabilities that, when visualized together, along with a fatal word, will immediately cause the servitor to cease to exist. So when designing the fatal flaw, be sure to keep these things in mind. First, make sure that specific set of vulnerabilities are a somewhat intricate combination of things plus your fatal word, but not too complex. You don't want it too simple, though, as you could risk accidentally ending its existence prematurely. On the other hand, too much complexity can pose a challenge to complete, especially if the servitor has been harder to control. The other thing is that you don't want to use the same fatal flaw for every servitor. Create a new combination each time so that each fatal flaw is unique to each servitor, so you don't accidentally use it on the wrong servitor. Lastly, record the fatal flaw so you can easily pull it out and use it if needed, but don't commit it to memory, again, to avoid accidentally using it. So now you have your planning and design completed. Now it's time to take your design and bring it to life. It's time for creation. Working with this sort of magic requires a dedicated and powerful imagination. This doesn't mean you need to be able to picture everything clearly. The visual aspect isn't all that important, but it does require you to believe that a spirit can be created by an act of magical will. You cannot try this magic and see if it works to test it out. You need to commit to the birthing of a servitor as though it's real. You must know that in carrying out these acts of magic, your true will feeds the creation of a being that's bound to your desires. You're not pretending the servitor into existence. You outline its qualities and then use magic to plant those qualities within a created spirit. Respect your servitors. Act as though they're alive and they'll answer your call. When treated as real, they're more likely to interact with the real world. Like in a pregnancy, conception is the beginning of the servitor's life. We achieve conception through the act of writing out our statement. This statement isn't just about the servitor, it's to the servitor. So for example, instead of saying, Jane Doe is a spirit of great power, you would write, you are Jane Doe, a spirit of great power. Write everything addressed to the spirit as though it already exists. What you're writing defines the servitor's existence and is the moment of conception. So first write the name, followed by its purpose, appearance, powers, timing, how it's called, what will be its source of sustenance, where will it reside, if it will hibernate as well, when and how, so on. And don't forget the fatal flaw. Write this in a firm tone, free of doubt, with the assumption that the spirit will obey. Finally, draw your servitor's sigil at the bottom of the paragraph. By the time you finish, your conception is complete. You can stop there, but if you want, you can add in a spoken component, such as reading the statement out loud and or then reading the statement in your mind. Reading it out loud announces its existence to the universe, and reading it in your mind forges a psychic connection with the servitor. Now comes the part of gestation. This is when you're letting it gain its power before its actual birth. During gestation, all you're really doing is remaining aware of your servitor. Think of it like a fetus in the mother's womb. You're aware it's there, alive, and getting ready to be born, but it's not yet actually born. Right now, your servitor is growing organically from your will and imagination. How long you want this period to last is honestly completely up to you. If you plan it to be a week, then you're only going to need to think about it occasionally, but still remain aware of it. If you want the process to happen quickly, you'll want to find a quiet place and remain intently aware of the servitor for a few hours. When deciding how long you want this process to occur, take into consideration your own ability to focus and concentrate. If you find that difficult in general, then you may want to let gestation occur over a week or two so you can focus and concentrate for shorter periods of time. If you feel you do have the ability, though, for continued focus and concentration, or you're just determined and willing, then you can have your sole attention totally onto it for an hour or so, all in one sitting. Regardless, when you think of it, think about its name, appearance, and its home. This is the stage where you're basically solidifying its reality. We'll be talking about its abilities and its purpose more in depth here in a bit, but right now it's all about really just ingraining its existence into reality. And now we come to the moment of birth. Remember, the reason you're creating a servitor in the first place is to give it life so that it can work to manifest the results you want. Through conception and gestation, your servitor's been created, but through the act of birthing, it moves it into full active consciousness in order to begin its work. This stage is one that's usually ritualized, but interestingly enough, the process is still actually pretty short, so don't expect an elaborate, long, drawn-out process or ritual. Something of great importance is not defined by the quantity of time you put towards it, but rather the quality of that time. Although short in time, the importance of this stage is significant and sets a stage for what comes immediately after, its living purpose. So remember, the servitor is already alive. You experience this through its conception and gestation. Now all you need to do is grant it the right to live with consciousness. This is the act of birth for the servitor. Honestly, the simplest way to do this is to call its name while willing it to be alive. Boom. Done. However, as I mentioned, many like to add ritual to bless the servitor with magical energy. And one of these rituals is what's known as the light from the dark. With this approach, you'll be thinking on darkness and seeing the light arising from infinite space. If you need to, you can close your eyes to do this if that helps. So first, you're going to get comfortable. Then when you're ready, start becoming aware of your body. Notice any sensations you're feeling. Then focus in on your chest, but think of your chest as a vast, open, empty space within you. By the way, if you're having trouble with visualization, don't worry. Just focus on being aware of an emptiness in that dark space. Stay aware of that empty space in your chest and start setting on feeling that light starting to come. This is more of a lightening as opposed to, say, a tiny speck of light getting bigger. Think of it more like when it's early morning and it's dark and then the sun rises and it gets brighter. Let it get brighter and brighter until it's like glaring. There's really no right or wrong in terms of what you end up seeing or feeling. It's really the concept of that darkness turning into light that you're focusing on. Direct that light into your servitor at the moment you're ready to birth, then let the light dissipate. Think of it as if you're breathing that light out of your mouth into your servitor as you give it life. That breath you create is a combination of universal energy represented by the light and the breath of your own life. This is what wills the servitor into conscious existence. Another method you can use is to say the servitor's name and breathe onto its sigil 3 times. Know that you're breathing directly onto your servitor, giving it life. Read through that written statement you made during the conception stage. You want to read it out loud and then in your head. Picture the servitor as best as you're able, but picture them like they're dormant or suspended with their eyes closed, and your breathing is waking them up. As you breathe, see or just be aware that the servitor's eyes are opening. When they're fully open, look directly into them. Your servitor will know you. A third way you can do this is more of a traditional approach, and that's using the elements of earth, air, fire, water, and spirit being sent into your servitor to awaken it. After sending each element into your servitor, you'll end with giving it your breath and the will to live. Whatever method you choose, just remember this process is truly an act of your will and imagination. Some people will be able to visualize this pretty easily, while others will have trouble seeing an image. If you can't visualize this, just feel and know your servitor's eyes have opened. At the end of the day, awareness that your servitor has opened its eyes is really the most important. Your servitor has been born, and now you can move on to its living purpose. Okay, so what is all this about living purpose? This is really you giving its first instructions immediately after birth. You don't have to wait a period of time. You can do this immediately after birth. Sometimes your servitor isn't needed immediately, so you simply acknowledge its existence, give it permission to go into hibernation until you're ready to call it. Regardless, your servitor is alive. Its living purpose has begun as planned, and all you need to do now is just stay aware of your servitor, feed it, and enjoy the results. Now, early on in your servitor's life, it's going to continue to grow and learn as it carries out its task. You've created an entity, remember, that's self-aware. It's intelligent, willing to work for you, so it's going to adjust and learn based on the skills, character, and power that you gave it. So now, at some point, if you've designed your servitor for a single purpose or a finite set of tasks, they're going to complete that. If you've designed and created it to dissipate when it's finished, then there's really nothing you need to do other than dispose of the sigil. If, however, you decide it's time to end your servitor's life because its service is no longer required, all you'll really need to do is call your servitor, thank it for the work it's done, tell it it's fulfilled its destiny, offer it gratitude, and tell it to complete its existence with death. If the servitor is housed in your body, command it to leave your body at the moment of death. If it's in a physical object, just stop thinking of that object as magical. It's now a mundane, everyday thing with no magical usefulness, and then just discard the object. So what happens after the death of your servitor? Well, one thing is you'll want to store away your written record of your servitor. Without the sigil, of course, as that should have been destroyed. Your records can be useful when creating other servitors in the future. Basically, it's the same concept as why we record things in the first place. It's a record of what's worked, what hasn't worked, how your servitors have developed over the years, and so on. Now, sometimes you may find yourself still picturing the servitor, especially if it's been around for a while. You may start to wonder if it's still alive, but it's not. It's just a memory. Servitors actually don't have ghosts. But if memories bother you, you can use the fatal flaw we talked about earlier to make sure it's truly gone. It's okay to remember a servitor with a sense of gratitude, but don't let yourself grieve over it. Just remember, you gave it the gift of purpose, and it fulfilled its purpose, so there's really nothing to mourn. Before I wrap up, I'd like to leave you with a few pointers. So for starters, for your very first servitor, consider aiming for a desire that's not too important to you. Obviously, you don't want it to be something you absolutely don't care about, but it shouldn't be something that's really critical. It's not like a make or break. So this takes some of the pressure off and lets the creative process flow a little freer, giving you some practice runs, if you will. Another tip is don't be concerned about how often you turn to servitors. For some people, servitors are their primary magical process. Others rarely use them at all. The magic you choose to use is personal to you. There's no single method to success. In the occult, there's many processes that can bring you what you want at any given time. Another pointer, make sure you truly consider your servitor a living being. If thoughts of it lean towards more at being imaginary, their ability to be truly effective can be at risk. Remember, servitors operate from the psychological level of their creator, which leads me then to remind you to always speak to it with respect, but never forget that you're the master, so also speak to it with authority. Be prepared to destroy it if it becomes a prankster or too powerful for you to handle. Don't ever plead with a servitor, because doing so turns the tables and turns you into the one that's the subordinate. Really and truly, most servitors don't require tons of attention or awareness, and if you check up on them daily or too frequently, that can actually backfire, as you're now lusting after a result, which pulls it away from your subconscious and back into your consciousness, which is not where we want it as a chaos. Now, unfortunately, servitors can sometimes lose their focus. So if you believe that's happening, nip it in the bud, talk to them, remind them of their purpose. If it gets to the point where it's not performing according to plan, the servitor will need to be disciplined. This could be as simple as warning, but be prepared to recall and retire a servitor if it really gets to that. Remember, Chaos Magic is, after all, results oriented. So if you have a servitor that isn't producing results, it may be time to end those efforts with that servitor. The last thing I'd like to leave you with is a bit on viral servitors. These are servitors you create and instruct to be able to replicate or reproduce themselves. Now, how they do it, of course, is based on your design. It could be like what happens with cell division, or maybe the servitor can actually give birth to another servitor according to certain parameters. Viral servitors are something to consider and very appropriate for long-term effects, such as increasing the chances of one's magic being successful, or for long-term healing or continuous protection. So that's all I have for you today. I hope that this was helpful, and hopefully you will be able to create your own servitor in the future.
If you've created your servitors using these or other techniques, tell us about it in the comments. And, as always, thank you for watching, and until next time we will see you on the next video.